Oh yeah. Happy March. Can't believe it's March. Right? I said this to my class before. I'm like, it feels like it's going so quick, right? Long days, quick months, right? Or quick years. Everyone have a good weekend? I was waiting, we were supposed to get all this rain, and then it just like never happened, right? So there's a chance on Wednesday, so fingers crossed for that. I love the rain. I'm like, I want. That's all right. I want to talk for a second about exam. So hopefully you feel pretty good about it. A lot of you should feel pretty good about it. I like to always share some statistics after a test. I think it's statistics. Not a big fan. I like statistics. I took their PhD level statistics. I was really into it. I don't know why. But I want to kind of let you know where you fell in relationship to everyone else. I think it's a nice perspective to have. So in our class, the high score was 100. There were actually a couple of people who got 100 and a few people who got like 99, 98. This is amazing. The low score was a 58. So a decent range, right? And then the average was 92. So the average score was an A, which makes me really happy to see a lot of A's. Makes me really happy when everyone does well like that. The average amount of time people took to take the test was 53 minutes. So on my end, what this tells me is that you were prepared, right? You weren't taking a ton of time trying to look everything up. Most of you did really well. The average was an A. All of these things are great. There are obviously probably a few people who might have wanted to do a little bit better. And so I get the same spiel in every class. I'm sorry for those of you who heard it earlier. But I would love to encourage you to use it as a learning opportunity. Okay, so if you are happy with how you did, which should be a lot of you, right? Pat yourself on the back, feel good, and keep doing the same thing. Okay, so it clearly worked for you if you got a grade you're happy with. If you wish you had done a little bit better, we have 2 more exams in here. You have the study guides for the exams now. So you could always study a little bit at a time, like each unit as we go along. If you didn't do the study guide, do the study guide next time. If you didn't study more next time. I think this one is the hardest exam because of the anatomy. Okay, there aren't any more diagrams on the future exams, so in my opinion, it's the hardest because of that. And a lot of you did amazing. Again, it makes me so happy that the average was an A. I think I should probably make my exams harder, but I don't believe in that. I don't believe in like artificial difficulty on exams. So again, a lot of you should feel good. Are there any like general questions or comments about the exam in general? Anything at all related to the test? None of the exams are cumulative. Okay, so I don't want to say forget everything that you learned in the first unit. You won't have to study it again for the next exam. So the next exam will start with everything from today until then, which will be so sexual orientation, communication, love and intimacy, adult sexual relationships, and sexual expression. Oh, and childhood and adolescent sexuality. So those will be our chapters that we'll jump into from today to the next exam. We also have a homework assignment. I'll talk about that at the end. A couple of you emailed me about it. You were thinking about it, which is fantastic. But I'll talk about that at the end today, just to make sure that you're feeling good about it. Those should be something kind of fun, but it obviously is a little bit of work too. We also have spring break coming up in a few weeks, something to look forward to if you're feeling a little like starting to get a little worn down, as we are like a third of the way into the semester at this point. Okay. So anything there, anything at all before we move on? Okay. Chapter 11, what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at orientation. Okay, so sexual orientation, I think kind of an interesting topic. I mean, I think everything in here is interesting, but this is a good one too. So we'll talk about what is orientation, what are the different types, how do we measure it, some attitudes and laws and discrimination, a little bit of time specifically at the end about bisexuality, which sometimes gets kind of overlooked or absorbed and ignored. So when we're talking about orientation, and I think this is so interesting that when you did your research, some people didn't know what sexual orientation was, right? They kind of confused it with gender. Gender and orientation can sometimes overlap a little bit, like influencing each other, but they are very separate entities. So that video that we watched, that genderbread person, they oversimplified it by saying that gender is who you go to bed as, and orientation is who you go to bed with. It's more than just who you have sex with or sleep with, right? It's who you're attracted to, who you like to spend time around, who makes you feel comfortable, which is uncomfortable. There are a lot of different elements to orientation, and I have a little orientation, I won't say quiz, but inventory that I'll give you later, which I think is kind of interesting to reflect on and see where you fall. But for the purposes of a definition, it's your preference, right? It's your preference for emotional and sexual relationships with whoever, right? And just like your gender identity, this can be very fluid, right? Your orientation could be heterosexual for 40 years, and then you meet somebody and all of a sudden it's bisexual or it's other, right? Like it can be something that's fluid for you. We don't have to put it in boxes, just like with gender, but we love to put it in boxes anyway, right? So we have lots of different orientations. These are the big, like 3/4. And then there's a ton of other things like pansexual, right? There's so many different terms that we're always developing. But the big ones, homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, and asexual. These are the ones that we typically talk about. Homosexual, right? Homo means like. So you're attracted to and prefer people of the same sex or gender as yourself, right? So two men or two women together. Heterosexual, hetero means opposite, right? So you are attracted to and prefer people of the opposite sex. Bisexual means that you could go either way, right? You might be attracted to men and women, people of the same and opposite sex to you. I oftentimes hear of like pansexual as well. It's a very common one. Pansexual would be where you're attracted to people regardless of their gender or sex. So it's the person, and their sex or gender doesn't really matter. Right? That's what we typically define as pansexual. And then asexual is somebody who has no attraction to either sex, right? You don't have a lot of attraction to or desire to be with anyone. And interestingly, asexuality is kind of on the rise in our culture, right? We're seeing more and more asexuality in addition to like the more traditional orientations that we talk about. The term gay, just as kind of an interesting side note, homosexual, we sometimes divide up into gay and lesbian. Right, gay, we tend to use referring to men, and lesbian for women. Not always. A lot of people will use the term gay just kind of as a broad umbrella term. Gay has kind of an interesting history to it, just as like a random little side note for you. Gay comes from a French word. And in the 12th century, so if we go back to 12th century, this down here. In the 12th century, if we describe someone as gay, we meant that they were joyful and carefree. We don't tend to use it this way anymore. You sometimes will hear it in like older films or older literature that the person was gay. And they don't mean that they were attracted to people of the same sex. They mean that they were joyful and carefree and happy, right? And again, something that we don't tend to use anymore. In the 17th century, we go forward a little bit. It took a little bit of a turn. Instead of being joyful and carefree, you were so joyful and carefree that you were uninhibited, and it was associated with immorality all of a sudden. Like you were joyful and carefree to the point of recklessness, right? It kind of went beyond like a traditional level. So you were uninhibited by any kind of moral restraint. And then when we got to the 1900s, it kind of took on more of how we view it now. It was a disregard for conventional sexuality. When somebody was gay, they were like ignoring conventional sexuality, which was to be the opposite, which was straight. So if you were on the straight and narrow, you were following conventional sexuality. If not, you were gay and disregarding it. That's where the gay straight, that's where the term straight comes from, right? You were either on the straight and narrow, or you disregarded conventional sexuality and you were gay, right? So kind of an interesting like evolution over time. But if you ever hear like, sometimes our grandma would always be like, well, you seem so gay today. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, what does that mean? Like, am I very flamboyant or what? She meant it happy, right? From her era, that was like a little more common. We don't tend to use it that way anymore, though I still sometimes will hear it in like older movies and films and stuff. So if we look at like orientation, we tend to measure it on a spectrum. Okay, and Kinsey, if you remember Kinsey, Alfred Kinsey, that we talked about before, talked about it as like it could range on a spectrum. Like our culture loves to put it in these like neat boxes of you're gay, straight, bi, whatever. But oftentimes people exist much more on like a spectrum of it. Like maybe you're a little bit closer to like heterosexual, kind of in the middle, or like exclusively like on one side or the other. Kinsey believed that we could kind of have a little bit of a range. And we'll talk about this a little bit more with this little quiz I have for you. But just to kind of think about this a little bit differently, I have a little sheet that I want to give to you. I'm going to have you in groups decide the orientation of these folks based on very minimal information, which is, you're probably going to be like, I need more, and that's okay. So what I want you to do is I want you to get into groups of like 2, 3, 4 people, whatever's easy. And there are 10 different scenarios on here, and you're going to decide, are they heterosexual, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and I'd like you to add asexual as well. Okay, you can add that on here as an option if you would like. So I'm going to hand these out. You're not turning it in, but as a group, I want you to decide. I'll bring each one so we can vote together. And I'll give you just a little bit of time to decide on these individual ones. And then we can talk. Convenient, 2, 3, 4 people. And you don't have to agree with your group, you can talk about it together. So take a few minutes as a group and decide which one do you think they are, and again, add asexual as an option if you'd like. When you're done, quick side note, when you're done, we are gonna vote on a few of these people, so join the votes. When you're done, and when you're out.
I want to be next to Oh, my son is on my house.
Yeah.
Is it number 9?
Oh, yeah, there is.
No, but
All right, so I'll give you another minute or two to wrap up and to join, and then we'll vote.
You always hear about yeah.
Everything has to be crazy. Like there are cultures there, there are groups there are problems.
If you can always join up with the name, that's the line.
And to that, the idea.
Most of you are there, we have 2 more people.
Just no.
I love all the little things.
Oh, I see.
Oh my God, I know.
There's correct.
Yeah. I think some are more obvious than the
Yeah.
other, right? But some of them so debatable.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, is everybody wants to be join? Yeah. Okay, okay, so we're not gonna vote on all of them, but I do have a few that I would like to vote on and discuss. So obviously, there's no like points or anything awarded to this. So what's gonna happen is each one will come up and you'll have 4 options, right? You'll have the options that are on here. So don't worry about speed, just pick the one that is correct for you. And you don't have to agree with your group. You can vote for yourself. So the first one that we're gonna vote on is number 1, which might be the most clear on the sheet, I think, of all of them. But let's vote on number 1. So I'm gonna start this. If you get kicked out, I wrote the code up here. You can join in with a neighbor. Okay. Okay, so again, don't worry about speed. Should have plenty of time. So person number 1. Okay. So heterosexual, bisexual, lesbian, gay, asexual. All right. Did one person make an error? Was that? Sometimes that happens. Like, you know what's funny is I marked it heterosexual in accident because I read it wrong the first time, right? Okay, so vast majority of you said lesbian or gay. Like, why? Why? Anyone want to support your overwhelming majority vote here? Yeah.
Because there's no like attraction to the opposite sex.
Yeah, right. She says, right, she's had a number of relationships with women, not interested in pursuing men. Feels pretty clear, but yeah.
Okay, this is a little out there, but reading it, I was like, oh, not interested in pursuing a relationship.
Okay.
So I was like, that doesn't necessarily like exclusively mean necessarily lesbian.
Sure.
Like, you don't know based on the wording of it, but I did put lesbian too. I just was like,
We're thinking it through very heavily.
yeah,
right?
I was there could be, if you add like another sentence on there,
Sure.
if it was like an attraction thing, or if it just was like a
Yeah,
not interested in like the relationship side of things with men, like it's
totally. And I think you could easily overthink any of these people, right? And I imagine a lot of you had a moment where you're like, I need one more sentence, right? And that would make it clear. So again, I think this one's probably the most clear on here, and that's kind of reflected in your voting, right? Interested only in women, not interested in men. Seems pretty straightforward at the moment. Haha, straightforward, maybe not. Lesbian forward. Okay, so let's vote on number 2. That's the next one we're doing here. A man who has had several romantic relationships with women and men, though he strongly prefers relationships with men. So we'll vote on fictional person number 2 here. Yes. And again, don't worry about the, so heterosexual, bisexual, lesbian, gay, or asexual. All right, so we have overwhelming saying bisexual, few people saying lesbian, gay. What are your thoughts? Anyone want to share? Yeah.
I was saying, because although it says, because he has had several romantic relationships with women and men.
Yeah.
And although it says he strongly prefers men, I feel like that would set some people off, but also people forget that when you're bisexual, you can also prefer one gender over the other.
Sure.
Like, doesn't mean you won't date the other, it just means like, I like being with this gender, just because whatever you're into.
So which way did you vote?
I voted bisexual.
Bisexual, okay? And yeah, just because you're bisexual doesn't mean it has to be 50-50.
Yeah.
You can have a preference one way or the other, right? I think you had, do you have the same thought? Or- Okay.
I also voted bisexual, but I also have met several people who meet this like description, and
Yeah.
a lot of them do actually identify as gay
Mhm.
or as straight if they don't have a strong preference, because it's just like easier to clarify that way if they're not really interested in relationships like that. So
Yeah,
I think at the end of the day, like it matters how you identify, but
Sure.
to be like strictly classified as bisexual for this description.
yeah. Yeah, and I think you could go either way, and a few of you did label like gay, right? Or lesbian or gay. And sometimes people will label themselves based on who they're with at the moment, right? So if this individual is male and is with a man, he might identify himself as gay at that moment, bisexual or heterosexual when he's with someone else. Like, it's kind of up to you. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point as well. Any other thoughts about fictional person number two? Like, what about the ones who said lesbian or gay? Anyone from those three? Leave us in suspense, right? I'm assuming it's maybe because he said he prefers relationships with men, right? Again, this is challenging. So my point with this, we'll get there, right? That it's not always as clear cut as we can be. It is, right? It's often a lot of preference. Let's go to number 5. A woman who has self-identified as heterosexual all her life, but finds herself sexually attracted to a new female coworker. Number 5, the office drama. Number 5. Same options. Heterosexual, bisexual, lesbian, gay, asexual. The suspense. I'm like, what's it gonna be? Oh, okay. So 5 of you heterosexual, 4 lesbian, gay, 16 bisexual. Thoughts? Like, what did you vote for and why? Yeah. Okay.
And I said that because like, just because you have like one preference, it doesn't mean that you necessarily like want to engage in that relationship. Like, you can be attracted with someone, but you don't actually have to be like gay or bisexual. And all of our previous experiences have been straight.
Okay. So attraction might not be enough to affect your orientation. Great. Okay. Yeah.
Well, first, before I said what I'm gonna say, I have a question about that though, because doesn't that mean like most people that like self-identify as bisexual, but like don't have the experience with women? I don't think that you could say just because you might not have like engaged with it, just like people that may be choosing to stay celibate doesn't mean they're necessarily like asexual.
Okay.
So like, I think that it would still identify as bisexual that way.
Sure.
And then also, I said, I put bisexual, but I also said self-identified as heterosexual, so like, if that's somebody's identity though, like, that's their choice. I was just doing it as like a objective interpreting that,
Mhm.
but people, if they identify a certain way, that's valid to.
Yeah. Okay. The layers of thought. I love it, right? And you had to do that too, right?
Yeah, similar. I think like, I chose bisexual.
Sure.
I get what you were saying about like, if she does still wanna present himself like as heterosexual, but since she did say sexually attractive, I thought that leaned more, like she was thinking more into the bisexual realm. I think there's a difference between being like, oh, I'm sexually attracted to this person, or just being able to say like, oh yeah, they're a pretty woman, you know?
Okay. So that
That's why
word kind of
yeah,
puts
yeah.
you in a different spot. Okay. There was a hand back there. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of put the same thing with that way, because she did feel sexually attracted, but also meaning to become bisexual. Because you can be attracted to someone, but like if you're sexual attraction and wanting to feel something sexually, something like that, and then you can sexually attracted.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah.
I think for me, it boils down to what she finds most utility in the moment, you know?
Okay.
Like, if she's, so I think I'm leaning a little towards what the first person was saying. I think that if she finds utility in saying that she's heterosexual, I voted for, bi, but
Okay.
I think if she finds utility in the word heterosexual, because in the past she's only dated men, and it's easier for her to say that to her family, and she doesn't
Sure.
pursue a relationship. Not saying that you have to pursue a relationship to,
Have that identity.
Right.
No.
and if later she wants to swap it and then swap it again, go for it. It's because, I don't know, whatever helps you get through the day.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Was there another hand? Any other thoughts about this person? How many of you, out of curiosity, were like, if I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm just gonna pick bisexual? Did anyone have that moment at some point, right, when doing this? Right, that's a really common like stereotype that we'll talk about when we get to bisexuality of like, well, when in doubt, bisexual, right? So with her, what's interesting is she identifies as heterosexual. So I tend to default there because that's what she identifies with. But then we have some other layers, which I'd love that you were starting to like think about and get at. Let's do my favorite one. This one's my favorite by a mile. Number 8, a woman who had a sexual relationship with her college roommate a decade ago, but since has had sexual relationships only with men. Okay, so let's vote on this fictional person. Number 8. Same options. Okay. Heterosexual, 84% of you, a lot of you. Got a few bisexual in there. What do we think? Well, so thoughts on her? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's college. Lots of crazy stuff happens in college.
sure.
I've kissed my girlfriends before,
Uh-huh.
but I'm straight, so. I don't know, I just think that she's straight, just because of one relationship, I don't think that, and since she has only had relationships with men afterwards, I think that she probably had it.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question? Ready? Vote one more time. How many times before it counts? 1, 2, 3, 4 plus? This is your personal opinion. How many times before it counts?
No, I don't. Automatically.
Wow. Some of you are very good. Okay, so we have a couple of you. You didn't have time to vote? Oh, no. Okay, a couple of you said once, 3 of you said once, 9 of you said twice, right? Because the first time could be like, you know, with statistician wise, we need a bigger sample size, right? Maybe that was the 3 here, or 4 plus. All right, so like how many times before it counts? Look how all over the board you are. Like, I would count once personally. Like, I feel like it would count even if it like, you know, maybe it didn't go right and you weren't sure. Or maybe you get 2
Just
or
for sure.
plus 9 times before it counts. So, yeah.
I mean, just what it comes down to for me though, it's like, people don't question heterosexual people like this. You don't go up to heterosexual people and be like, yeah, but have you had sex? Like, do you know? Do you know? Like, I don't think the experience necessarily counts what your sexuality is. It's like what you're attracted to.
Okay.
And I think that like saying that it, like, you have to like meet a standard of like how many times you have sex is like kind of like not nice to the people that haven't done that, you know?
Okay.
And that's the same thing, like, you don't ask straight people, you're not like, well, have you had straight sex a certain number of times to count that you're straight? Like, how do you know you're not gay? You
Okay.
know? So I think that that's where it comes down to, is it's like a double standard that's
Sure, right? Okay, so a little bit different standard depending on which orientation we're talking about. Other thoughts? Yeah, about this person, about this, yeah.
I appreciate the assignment, but I think overall, ever looking at someone and trying to guess their sexual orientation, or you personally projecting like onto them and being like, oh, this person is gay because, well, they did this one time, or this person is straight because they did this one time,
Sure.
is rude, and I don't like it at all.
Yeah.
Because I am a lesbian, and I have definitely been sexually attracted to men, but I'm a lesbian. So like hearing people say, well, she could be bisexual because of this, is very uncomfortable to me.
Sure.
Personally, because I don't like the idea of someone looking at me and going, that thing would be with a man. I don't like that. So just like this in general, and looking at someone being, oh, well, objectively, this is happening, or this is happening. It's like, that's not true. There's so much more. And obviously there's just like a sentence, but it's like,
And I love that it irritates me.
it
Right?
was so annoying.
And I'm glad, right? Because it is, it's something that is very personal. It's something that is your own and private, but we all make these assumptions constantly, right? What's really interesting, my partner is super feminine, right? Which I love about her, like very feminine. If I'm nowhere near her, everyone would assume she's straight, right? Based on her appearance. The second you put me next to her, oh, like it changes, right? Like the second I'm standing there, everywhere we go, people remember me, but I guess I stand out, right? But whenever I'm next to her, her orientation instantly gets viewed different, right? We constantly are making these assumptions based on the people you surround yourself with, the way you dress. Your gender identity often can influence stereotypes of your orientation. So I love that it pissed you off, right? That's good. It should kind of make you mad. It's so overly simplistic, and it's not at all how it should be. But we do it a lot, right? Yeah.
I think
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
So if someone has identified as gay their whole life and has one straight sexual encounter, that doesn't mean they're bisexual or straight. It only matters if whether or not they enjoy that experience and want to do it again.
Sure.
Yeah, I had that same feeling, like, for second, because it was like, yeah, it says, sexually monogamous relationship with her husband, but she does self-identify as a lesbian.
Yeah.
So like, at the end of the day, like,
as.
Sure.
Even though like if you look at that externally, that's why I asked about sexual, because that's what like you want to be assumed
Mhm.
that relationship, you go, oh, they're bisexual, even though she's identifying as lesbian, which I say.
Okay, okay, yeah,
I'm just curious, I struggle answering all these questions,
Sure.
I just wanted more, it was
yeah,
irritating
Yeah.
because I felt like, who am I to judge what these people are? So I literally struggled with this assignment.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard, I mean, you literally have a sentence if you're lucky to, right? Like,
Right.
that's not a lot to go on. I think they're all literally one sentence, right? Yeah,
Solve the numbers, my brain's like, oh, 0. Like, even if you haven't been with somebody, although part of it is because I often see sexuality as like such an internal experience.
sure.
Oh, that's partially because I'm ace, so I'm just like, oh, romance, and then I'm like, sex exists, and I forgot about that,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about like people being like, titties in like their brain. So, yeah.
Okay, all right. So, I mean, and it's so, like, you're hearing all the different perspectives. I think what's so interesting to me about this is this piece of it. Like, I find this fascinating and I love asking this question because it's all over the board and it's consistently all over the board. Like, to me, once counts, like I would count it as part of like my repertoire of my identity, I would suppose, right? And maybe, like I said, like I'd give it a second shot if I wanted to make sure, like you take one bite of something and you're not sure, so you take another bite, maybe a third if you have to, right? Sometimes you know right off the bat, that first bite, you're like, no way, right? But it's interesting, like everybody has a different perspective on what counts and what doesn't, right? And there's often this like, oh, it's college, no big deal. But it could be a big deal for some, right? It's interesting. I'll go all the way back to those two, yeah.
I was just wondering because, like, if, like, I mean, for number 7, if she's in a sexual monogamous relationship with her husband, and I mean, it's safe to assume that it's like a happy marriage, doesn't that kind of contradict being a lesbian? It's like,
Yeah, a little. I had a friend in college, a straight male, cisgendered male, right? And I self-identified as lesbian. And it made me so mad. I'm like, no, you can't do that. And he's like, well, who are you to tell me what I can do? I'm like, fine, you're right, whatever. Like, but I refused to acknowledge it. It was so like, because that was his identity. He's like, I identify as lesbian. I think he was doing that wrong. But like, but what you identify as ultimately is your choice, but that does contradict a little bit, right? It's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
I just think for everybody it could be different, you know.
Going back to 7, this one is really tricky because my great grandma, she was a lesbian, but she was married to a man.
Okay,
She did have sex with a man,
sure.
but she wasn't like attracted to him at all. Sorry, Jack, but she didn't like, she had like.
Poor Jack. I
once
feel
a
bad
month-
for this guy. I've never
Once
met.
a month they would have sex and then she got pregnant, they had Sharon, they never had sex again,
Right.
okay? She was a
Yeah.
lesbian, but she still married a man.
Well, and sometimes people aren't free to follow the choices that they would like to follow, right? It might be that you live in a very conservative family that wouldn't support you if you were following your pursuit of wanting to be with a woman. So you marry what's proper and considered normal and you do what's expected. And then you have this closeted like side of what you really want. That happens a lot, especially when people are younger and you don't have that autonomy. You might date somebody and it might just be for show. Like it could totally be on the surface. I remember I had a for show boyfriend. His name was Josh. Jack and Josh, right? Like we got the J's, right? And like he was gay and I was gay and we pretended we were with each other because our parents, like, we wanted them off our backs, right? And we didn't do anything, but we were dating each other, right? Like, and so sometimes people do that too. Like it can be a cover, like it's a form of passing, if you will. People do that a lot. I mean, poor Jack, right? I feel bad for the guy, right? Yeah.
like have like a very close friendship and marry for economic reasons.
Yeah.
And they're like, we'll figure out what
Right.
we want to be within our 50s.
Right? Or people who love each other deeply and never get married because they don't believe in marriage, right? Relationships are all over the place, right? Yeah, I'll go back and I'll come to you. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Civil courtships.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not have to stay better financially.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm. And people still do that. People still do that now. Yeah.
I think what also complicates seven is like there's the overlap with like gender expression.
Yeah.
You don't know, like some people are very specific about like what genitalia they find attractive, like what they specifically like sexually find attractive. So you don't know if like this is a trans man and it's like this woman is specifically attracted to the genitalia,
Okay.
but like respects the identity. So it's like you don't know kind of where identity lies as far as like gender expression as well.
Sure.
And that's, I had a like personal question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I know like a previous class, you were saying you feel like you fall more on the gender fluid area. So
Or like non-binary.
Non-binary.
I would label myself as non-binary.
Non-binary, but then does your partner, does she identify as lesbian or what's the?
We've talked about this
Yeah,
a
that's
lot.
right. That's
That's
what I was
interesting.
wondering.
And my daughter Emma, who came in here, like, and I was telling you she kissed a girl. She did kiss a girl, by the way. Like, how dare she? She's 10. Right? But she's all like, it wasn't my first time. You scandal, right? Like, no, they like, what's this girl's name? But we talked about this a lot. This is actually like because of my daughter Emma, like a huge conversation in our household. And my partner for years would identify herself as bisexual, right? That like, oh, I could be attracted to men or women. But recently, I think she has decided it's pansexual. Like it's not the sex, it's the person.
Yeah.
Right. And so she's like, I would be attracted to somebody who was male or female. It's the person and their personality and the things about them and their like, external genitalia and like whether they're male or female doesn't matter to me. I could find attraction and love in either. And so that would be more like pansexual versus bisexual is like both. You're attracted to both or either. So she would identify as pansexual, but I think that's kind of a recent definition, right? It was always for years it was bisexual. So we'll stop there with these people, like, but my point with this, and like you're clearly there, like I wanted it to irritate you. So I'm glad that it did. Sorry to irritate you. Like not that I want to ever irritate you, but I'm glad that you were bothered by it. This is something that is so complicated and dynamic, but we want it to be simple. Just like gender identity. Gender identity is fluid, it's complicated. Your orientation, right? Some people would say attraction matters. Other people would say it doesn't, right? I'm going to give you an inventory here in a moment that includes who you like to hang out with as part of your orientation. And I don't personally agree with that because it takes my score sometimes, right? And I don't like that, right? But when we look at orientation, it used to be that it was just who you have sex with, who you're intimate with, right? But it's so much more than that. It's who you're attracted to, who you feel comfortable with, who you are in relationships with, who you are physically like engaging in activities with. There's a lot of different elements to it, and it can change very quickly for people depending on those who come in and out of your life. So let me give this to you. I'm not collecting this. This is purely for you. So be honest, I'm not going to collect it, okay? What you're going to do is this is called the KSOC, the Klein Sexual Orientation Grid. So this is an actual measure of orientation. It's used very frequently in research. And so what you're going to do is you're going to answer, it has a little chart on it. Don't worry about the back. It has a little chart on it that has A through G, and you're going to rate your responses for each box. It looks at your past, your present, and your ideal, right? That way, if you haven't had a chance to maybe explore what you would like to explore, that would be your area. Okay, so there's different instructions for different boxes, so make sure you look at those. But again, I'm not going to collect this, but I will tell you how to score it and what it means. And we can talk about it after, because it's definitely not perfect. Got some issues as well. No? Okay, so you're gonna go through each one of these. And as it says here, A, B, C, D, and E, you're gonna use this top scale. Okay, so 0 is other sex only, 6 will be same sex only, and then there's obviously everything in between. And then F and G, you're gonna use that scale on the bottom. So think about how you tend to be in general for your past, your present, and then your ideal, right? And if you're not sure what they're talking about, they kind of define the variables a little bit more below. But I'll give you a few minutes and then I'll tell you how to score this, and we'll talk about what it means and some issues. That makes sense? Is anyone confused at all? Have questions? I heard a few. Yeah.
How far past are we talking?
So they say past up to a year ago. So like beyond a year.
Okay.
Yeah. So past is your life up to a year ago. Present is the most recent year. And ideal would be what you would prefer if you could choose. Yeah. So it should be a number between 0 and 6. Right. So the first one, like sexual attraction. To whom are you sexually attracted? So past, you would say other sex only. Like if you've only ever been with the other sex, it'd be 0. Or same sex only would be 6, or anything in between. So you could go through each one for past, present, and ideal in whatever order makes sense to you.
Can you explain ideal again?
Yeah, so what they say on here, ideal is what you would eventually like, or if you were given the choice. Because some people haven't had a chance to explore what they might like. So when you're done reading, just so you know for scoring, if you're still working on it, it's totally fine. You're gonna add up all of your scores. Okay, so you have 21 scores in total. You're gonna add them all up. Feel free to use a calculator on your phone or a mathematically inclined neighbor, whatever you need. But add up all of your scores, and then you're gonna divide that by 21, and it should give you a number between 0 and 6. If it's greater than 6, you did something wrong. Okay, and go back and do it again. So add up all of your scores. Divide that total by 21, and it should give you a number between 0 and 6. And that's the number we're going to use to score this. Some wonderful numbers. You're gonna add all of them and divide by 21.9. Sorry to make you do math. No, don't worry about that.
He's fine.
Third one on fourth.
Yeah.
What's your sexuality? Five.
Five.
I take.
Oh, I love that.
Wait,
That is the best thing.
wait, so I just went wrong.
3.14 is, would be fine.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's the middle.
Just between 0 and 6. If you're gonna score like 12, you can come in with that. 12 means you're like very, very, very.
Divided by 5. I know. I wanted to say.
Anyone need more time? Yeah, like 1 more minute, then we'll talk about it.
Oh, wait, there was others. Wait, so not. More than.
No,
Prior.
All right, let's talk about this together because it's killing me. I'm dying to know, okay? So I'm never gonna ask you to share your result. That is your private, like, information. But if you take your number that you got, it should be a number between 0 and 6. You can compare it to Kinsey's grid. Okay, so 0 would be exclusively heterosexual with no homosexual like interest. 6 would be exclusively homosexual with no heterosexual, and then 3 would basically be in the middle, like bisexual. Okay, so the farther you are towards 6 or 0, the more you're on like one end or the other. You're right in the middle with pi, right? Then you're kind of like in that bisexual range. So you can take that information. What I love about this inventory is it includes the past, the present, and the ideal. I think that's one big strength. Another big strength is it includes a lot of different areas, but I think there are some weaknesses to this too. Okay, so anyone have like a reaction to your score? You don't have to share your score, but like reaction, do you think it's accurate, not accurate, like issues? It was just an isolated incident. That was that one time in college incident.
Also, I think for asexual people, this might have been difficult
Yes.
to answer.
I love that you brought that up. So people who identify as asexual, there's like nothing on here that includes that, right? So that's a huge issue with this scale, is it does not account for people who identify as asexual. What if you've never had sex? What if you're not interested in sex? There are some issues, right? I'm glad you brought that up because it's a problem. Yeah.
I took all of the ones that have to do with like social stuff, and then I just put like a 3, and then I left the rest blank.
Okay.
So I got 1.2 because I'm commuting.
Okay. Okay. Right. And so because it didn't capture you accurately, you kind of answered a little bit like haphazardly, and your result doesn't give you any meaningful information.
No,
That's a
was
problem, right? If your score isn't captured nicely here, that's a problem. That's a statistical, like psychometric issue. Yeah.
I think it's a little odd that friendsfunny would make you more gay or straight.
Yes.
I find that very strange.
Yeah.
Because if I'm friends with all women, that doesn't mean I'm gay, that just means
Right.
I'm like having friendships with people that have the same experiences as me.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up because for me, that's my biggest issue with this test, right? My score came out, where did it go? 4.4, right? I came out here, like right here, right? 4.4. And it was because I strongly prefer to hang out with men, right? All my friends are guys, right? And I enjoy their company. I find them much more like straightforward most of the time. I'm not attracted to them. I just like to hang out with them, right? I'm literally, that's it. But it takes my score every time. Like, it makes me so mad. Like, if I eliminate that one, my score is much more like accurate for me. Like, but it brings my score down and it puts me closer to like bisexual, which I don't identify as, because I enjoy the company and the interactions of people of the opposite sex. I think that's a big limitation. Some people think that matters. Other people would say no.
I also think it's like, let's say you're friends with gay men.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean you're attracted to
Sure.
men. That just means you have like a similar experience.
the complexity, right? Yeah.
It's such a weird comparison too. Like, generally, like, when you think like, stereotypically, like, how like a heterosexual couple will be, like, I mean, you think like, generally you have like a straight man who hang out with like other men, which is like, sometimes people are weird about like platonic relationships with like men and women.
Sure.
It's like, I think it's weird to like have that like on the scale, and like stereotypically, you can like a man who hang out with men, and then have like a lady for like heterosexual relationship, and like vice versa.
Yeah, yeah, and it affects your score according to this inventory, and this is one of the better inventories. Some of the old ones only include sex. That's all they care about, who you're attracted to, who you have sex with, right? Which have a ton of problems because it's obviously more complex than that. Yeah,
Yeah, I got the exact same score as you, and I also identify as gay, so I definitely think that there's something going on.
yeah,
Just
it's a
because
conspiracy to
think-
ruin our scores.
Yeah, I think that like people often assume, like I always hear the old stereotype from like the 80s and 90s that men and women can't be friends.
Right.
Like wanting each other or whatever, like I heard that from my dad a lot, like when I was growing up, and so I think it's like just a total stereotype. of
Yeah.
Friendships in general, you know.
Yeah, and there are a lot of stereotypes about friendships, that you can't be friends with people of the opposite sex. Well, I have a harder time with people of the same sex because like, I don't want to have like complications with that, right? And so it's easier for me, I'm like, you are like completely, I couldn't be less interested, let's hang out, it's so simple, right? And like, to me, that's so like appealing, but it affects this, right? And so it's interesting, there are like some really interesting ideas about who you can be friends with successfully, and like that it can't just be platonic, right? Yeah.
It's funny you guys brought that up. I have a friend who like is definitely straight, identifies as straight. He has a lot of friends who are lesbians.
Sure.
He's met at a bar. He's like, the guys at the bar are so sweet. They're always buying me drinks. I'm like, I don't know how to tell you. I think that's a gay bar.
Right, yeah, that's so funny.
They're always giving me compliments.
Right? You're like, I feel great when I leave.
But I think this is kind of interesting, and I see the problems with it too.
Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting to consider that into it, because again, like, for people who are asexual, or for people who only like, but have very like separate romantic and sexual attraction.
Sure.
It's really interesting to look at this and include like friendships.
Yeah,
But like, because especially I've ran into, I feel like a lot of people run into the same guy who has like a girlfriend who like he's very attracted to, they have sex, but just like does not respect women or like
Sure.
that relationship, or wants to like spend serious like quality time with this person, and would like prefer to only hang out with the guy friends and be very disrespectful to their partner. So I think it's interesting that like, are you like emotionally not able to connect with women?
Mhm.
It's like, it's just an interesting concept to think about.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really is valid, but it's just interesting to think about.
sure, sure. And then some of them too, like, a couple other things on here, like, how are you defining sex? Like, what if sex can be something different to everyone, right? And if you're in like a homosexual relationship, sex might not be viewed the same way as like in a heterosexual relationship. How are we defining that? I don't have a lot of friends who are gay or lesbian. Like, I never hang out with people who are like gay or lesbian, because I don't, literally, I think I have one friend who identifies that way and they live far away, right? And so, which is sad, right? But like, so, like, I end up spending most of my time with people who identify as like heterosexual, or I don't know how they identify, because I would never ask, right? And so that also affects my score. Like, just the complexity of this is what I want you to like understand. Like, that it isn't just like a simple thing. And you had your hand up, I didn't mean to ignore you.
No, I was gonna say that I'm ace, right? And I just did, because I don't want to look ideal, I had the question to me.
Right.
So with that, I got 15 numbers. So then I just divided it by 15 and
Yeah.
I got an accurate issue.
Okay, right, so you found a way to adapt,
Yeah.
right, to it, which is amazing. And as a side note, with ace meaning asexual, in case you just really like mention. So I just, this is the best one that's out there, but it's got issues, right? And so don't ever, as a side note, as a psychology like person, don't ever let an instrument, a test, tell you your identity, okay? So your identity is what you want it to be, not what this says, right? I completely disagree with my 4.4, and that's okay, right? It's just a starting point, right? And again, your orientation is something that's very fluid. So if you were to take this a month from now, it could be different depending on what happened in that month, right? Like it could be different. Bisexual.
Yeah.
That's a new name, bisexual. 3.14, bisexual. I like it. We need a cake section. That's what I'm doing. Right? Keep that to myself. I'm just a cake here. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, it this just like brought up memory in school of like the argument. Like, yeah, I'm sure everyone. I remember that myself grade. Like, I remember we were like sitting in like, it was like the break, nutrition lunch, whatever.
Yeah.
And it was like, if someone was even taking it, they were like, oh, well, you're questioning.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm just, it's just interesting going through this, like,
Yeah.
I think we have come far.
What's interesting is I've been teaching this class here at this college for 15 years. And in those 15 years, I've given some version of it. So 15 years ago, when I gave this, everybody did this. It was like, I swear, everyone was like, no one looked, it was dead quiet. No one would have said my score was 3.1. No one would have been. Everyone like hid their results. It was awkward and uncomfortable. I got in trouble for talking about my relationship. Like I was in tenure and we were talking about same-sex marriages and I shared about my marriage. I was joking about the cake at the marriage. Like that's literally what I was talking about. And my tenure review committee was outraged and I had to be evaluated again, right? Because I brought up my relationship. I was shoving my agenda. I was talking about the cake. Like, I didn't care. I was just like, the wedding, the best part of our wedding was the cake, right? Like for me, right? I didn't say that, but it was. I got in trouble for it. So what's really interesting to me is to watch just the evolution and the openness, right? The fact that so many of you are willing to say, I'm this or I'm that, and my number is this, and like, let's talk about it. It has come a long way. Now, whether we'll stay there or not, like in the era that we're in right now, will be interesting to observe. But it is something that I think we as a society have more understanding of, but a lot of people still don't understand the idea of orientation. Yeah. Sure. I've heard that so many times, right? Like if, right, and they banned them years ago, right? They've been banned, and we'll talk about that more on Wednesdays.
They're still around.
Yeah, right.
They're illegally off.
Right, and they focus on gender and gender roles and gender norms. But I'm a cheerleader. We'll watch a scene from that on Wednesday. It's a great movie on that topic. But again, if you wanted to know your orientation according to a quiz, there's your scale. But I really want you to understand that it is very, very fluid. And there are a lot of pieces to it, and there's not a lot of agreement on what should count and what shouldn't. And even just in here, how many times should count was all over the place, right? And so just something to hold on to. A couple of the things, let's get through this slide and then we'll probably be done for today. What determines your orientation? How do we decide what your orientation is, right? What are the things that influence it? I will tell you as of today, we do not know. We have no answer. We have no answer for whether it's genetic or biological or environmental. If it were purely genetic, it would have died out. Why? Why would it die out if it was purely genetic? Yeah. Okay, no purpose, no reproductive purpose to it, yeah. And no reproduction in general, no children, right? If gay and lesbian people are much less likely to have kids, just because it's more complicated typically to do. And so it would die out. Yeah, did you have a follow-up thought to that?
Oh, yeah, I heard it that when the mother is under stress, that the chances of it being likely, because that means the kid has more of a some sort of instinct to protect the family.
Yeah.
as like it's a sibling. Yeah. Number of siblings.
Right.
Certain number of siblings.
The number of male siblings that you have, there's a lot of correlations.
Evolutionary.
Yeah.
Explanation.
So from an evolutionary perspective, or biological perspective, being gay or lesbian would have died out because you have less likely to reproduce. There are a lot of interesting correlations between the number of male siblings. There was a whole correlation between the size of like your finger to the ratio of your thumb. Like they did a whole thing at Berkeley about that years ago, purely correlational. That's the interesting thing with all of this, it's correlational, right? And the phrase in psychology is correlation does not imply causation, right? Just because two things are connected doesn't mean they cause each other. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so when we look at genetics, there's really like no evidence to support that. Sometimes it seems to run in families, especially with like the number of sons within a family. The more like biological sons to the same parent, the more likely later ones are to be gay. But it's again correlational. Hormones, there's a lot of thought about hormonal influences in during pregnancy, right? That could play a role, again, purely correlational. Birth order was kind of like with the number of sons. Physiology, like I said, there were weird correlations between like the ratio of your index finger to your thumb. Totally correlational. Freud talked about it as an extreme narcissism, loving people like yourself, right? So Freudian right there, right? You love someone like yourself, that's why you're gay or lesbian. No support to that. Experiences and learning. If it were that because your parents were gay, you become gay, right? That would change everything, right? That's not the case. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. Like, I feel like my kids are very like open with their sexuality because we're really open with our sexuality. My daughter Kaya identifies as asexual at 12. She thinks love is gross, right? I'm fine with that. Stay there as long as you can, right? Love is gross. She's like, love is gross. Whenever we get anywhere near each other, she's like, ew, and walks away. And like, that's how most children. Well, not all her 12-year-old friends. Like, one of her friends was mad that she didn't kiss her on Valentine's Day. And my daughter was like, why would I kiss you? We're friends. I was like, that's right, Kaya, right? Because she's 12. Right? Right? And so it's just so interesting. Your family environment can shape how you feel about orientation and how you view it, but it doesn't change your orientation necessarily, not in a causal way. Social constructions, right? If everyone followed the norm, then being gay, lesbian, or bisexual would fall off, or asexual, it would all be gone, right? Because it's not the norm. So to date, as of today, and this could change at any time, but as of today, there's nothing that provides a satisfactory explanation. Nothing biological, nothing environmental. It's thought to be some combination of everything that leads to like your orientation outcome, right? So just something to kind of hold on to as of today. That's where we're at. Yeah.
I want to thought of how we don't find out, and I think that's a knowledge we'll have. We'll try to like undo it. Like I think it's kind of like what's it called? How some nations on Earth have it where you can't see gender, like the gender before they're born.
Sure.
Because it's like, oh, that is no longer something that we can do safely. You know, not saying that people shouldn't be able to have abortions, have when you want to, but just like if it's starting to create an issue where there are enough women, it's okay, you can have an abortion, but you just can't know what the baby's gender is before they're born. You know, and I see the same way when it comes to people being gay or being trans. I'm like, I don't think it's information society has shown it can handle without being weird about it.
So if I just like, so if we knew what caused it, there would be ramifications for that, right? Like, yeah. And I mean, and I think that's probably true. If we knew it was genetic, or if we knew it was hormonal, like then we could, in theory, change it that way, right? And so, yeah, there are definitely consequences if we knew, but as of right now, we don't, right? We really, really don't. And we don't know what determines your gender identity. I mean, it's just so many factors, all the ones on that test and then some, right? That determine who you are and the individuals that you interact with, right? Not every person who's male or female or other is the same, right? And some people who are masculine or more feminine, like everyone's all over the place. So it's very complicated, even though our culture likes to imagine that it's very simple, just like gender. Okay. So we'll pick up here next time. We'll talk a little bit about some statistics. As of today, we'll talk about some attitudes and therapies and like different things in bisexuality. Again, I'm not collecting that from you. In my last minute or two, I want to talk about your homework assignment. Okay, before you pack up, I just want to make sure you're feeling good about this. So on Wednesday, by Wednesday at basically midnight, 11:59 p.m., your first homework assignment is due. So if you go onto Canvas, you can see right here where it says homework assignment number 1. So if you click on modules, homework assignment number 1 is right here. Okay. And so I just want to take a minute, give me just a minute to go over this. Oops, it got tired of waiting for me. So in this class, you're doing 2 different homework assignments. Now the same menu exists. I made it related to food, of course. So if you click on this little assignment menu, it's going to bring up a list of a bunch of different options. And I tried to make like a ton of them. As a side note, if you ever have an idea for an option, run it by me. I've had people go to strip clubs and write about, like, you're looking, all of you were like, oh, come on. You can do that for assignment too, right? I've had people go to strip clubs and write about their stereotypes versus reality. I've had people do also interview somebody like in like one of these topics. If you have an idea, please run it by me. And I want this to be something that pushes you a little bit or like interests you. I want these to be fun. You are writing a little paper, but it should be fun. Okay, so options that are on here, you can go birthday shopping, right? So you would go to a couple, I'm just going to give you like a quick highlight of each one. You could go to 2 stores that sell toys, and you're going to ask the people there for recommendations for twins, 1 boy and 1 girl, and record what they say and record like what the store was set up like. With each one of these, you're doing some little activity and then a paper, kind of sharing your reaction. You can take a little questionnaire. It's on the previous page, I'll show you, but it's rating your sexuality and kind of reflecting about your own sexuality and identity. You can go condom shopping. You don't actually have to buy condoms unless you need them, then happy coincidence, right? But you're going to 2 different places or a few different places that sell condoms, recording where they are, what they had, the prices of them, how you felt in that place. Very different going to a gas station versus like a Target versus a drugstore. And you'll write about that. You can go get tested for STIs. You don't have to share your results, just the process of what you went through. You can pick a sperm donor. So if you were to pick a donor for having like children, you can go on their website and look at all of that. I've even had somebody be a sperm donor and they got paid for it. They were like, that was great. I got paid and I did the assignment. You can go to a sex shop. So 2 sex shops actually. And I require that one of them be one of these big stores and then one can be of your choice. So if you don't have time for this one this time around, you can do it next time. But you're going to ask a question about an item you know nothing about. You're going to write about it. Go with a classmate, take your partner, make it fun. Like go with other people. You can do, right? All of us together Saturday. Let's go. You can do something with advertising. So you can put together a bunch of like video ads or pictures, or you can make a collage. You can do something with movies, where you find different scenes from a movie, a couple of movies and scenes related to topics that we're covering. You can do an art project. So if you're really creative, I've had people crochet things, I've had people make sculptures, do paintings, and you'll turn in that piece of art plus a short paper. You could read a book related to something that we're covering in here and then write about it. Those are like the ones that are on here. But again, if you have an idea, even if it's just for the next one, run it by me. I've had people do all sorts of things that aren't on here and I'm fine with that. The essence of it though, you're doing an activity and then writing a short paper. Okay, and this is due by Wednesday night. So if you find yourself limited in that you don't have a lot of time, push that other one that requires a little bit more to next time. And you do a different one this time. 2. So you're doing 2 of these. Okay, so you're doing 1 now that's due on Wednesday. And then you're doing 1 later in this month. So if you don't have time to do the one you want now, pick something that's a little more accessible. I really, if one of them sounds super uncomfortable and scary to you, I hope you pick it. Okay, take someone with you, but do it, right? Like if you're like, oh my God, I would never go to a sex shop, please pick it. Like that'd be so good for you. Yes. Well, you can only do 2, right? But I do have an extra credit option. I'll talk about later. All right, I'm gonna stop there. I'll hang out up here if you have questions or want to run an idea about it. Otherwise, I'll see you all on Wednesday. No.
Thank you.
Bye, take care. Yeah, what's up?
I got a book. I just want to get sure it's okay,
Yeah. You stop this so that